Hey guys, so really quick before I begin this video, if you could please do me a huge favor and like the video and comment on it right now, I'd really appreciate it. Now with that, enjoy the video. Love you guys. In the summer of 1994, my sister and I moved to Hawaii to live with our father. While we were gone, our mother moved into an apartment to save money. Right away, strange things started to happen. Her two cats would never enter the bedroom of the apartment, choosing instead to sleep in the living room. They would claw and bite if you tried to carry them in there, and then run quickly away. Mom only spent one night in the room, and then opted for the living room as well. She didn't see anything, but felt as if there was someone watching her, or that someone was in the room. A few weeks later, she returned home from work to find her disposable razor disassembled on the bathroom counter. Even the twin blades were removed, and the whole apparatus was laid out in a straight row. The next night, my cousin, Stacy, and her husband, Mitch, went to stay over at my mom's with her. They were in from out of town, not going over to ease her fears. She wasn't scared yet. The two of them argued with Mom over sleeping arrangements, and she assured them that they never slept in the bedroom anyway. That night, my mother woke to hear Stacy and Mitch screaming in terror. Mom ran into the room to find Mitch trying to pull Stacy off the bed. She was screaming to get her off the bed, so Mom started pulling too. Once they got her to the floor, Stacy said that it felt like someone was sitting on top of her, and she couldn't breathe. And while it was going on, she said she could see a teenage boy in the corner, laughing uncontrollably. The three of them decided to drive to my grandma's to spend the night. Fast forward to Christmas break, when my sister and I came home to visit. Our first afternoon at the apartment, we heard a loud crash from the bathroom. All people and animals in the house were accounted for in the living room, so we went to check it out. Everything from the cabinet under the sink was out on the bathroom floor. It wasn't all tipped over, however. It was lined up in a straight row. After that, Mom told my sister and I about all the strange things that had occurred. My sister and I were thrilled, thought it was really cool. Mom said that we were more than welcome to sleep in the bedroom if we wanted to, so we did. Early the next morning I woke up and thought I saw someone standing in the walk-in closet. The sun was just starting to come up, and I thought for sure it was my sister playing a trick on me. When I looked over in bed, she wasn't there. Instead, there was a guy, maybe teens or early 20s, with shaggy black hair and no face, in bed with me. He reached out for me, and I literally wet my pants, running into the living room. I woke my mom and sister, who had moved during the night, said she had the creeps, and attempted to tell them what happened. Mom told us to get our stuff, and we left. Later that afternoon, I recited the story to Stacy, and she said the guy I described was the one she saw laughing at her. Mom went to the leasing office a week later and asked to be moved to another apartment. All the leasing agent had to say was that no one had lived in that apartment longer than 4 months. It started some years ago, and I'm happy to say that it's been over for some time now. I'm confident that I'm no longer being followed by Mage, but I would like to share my experiences with you, and if you can provide any insight or better understanding of what happened to me, I would be most happy. Some years ago, I was sleeping over at a friend's apartment. I went to bed and laid there alone with my thoughts, until I think I fell asleep. I was awoken by 3 sharp knocks, similar to someone knocking on a solid wooden door, and turned my head to the bedroom door, which was 3 yards away to my right. The door was closed, yet within the doorframe was a figure. To my eyes, the figure was shimmering and vivid with colors, without any real human form, yet to my senses, I was certain that it was a woman, that she was extremely tall, and that she was wearing jewelry. I perceived her with the absolute clarity that my eyes were unable to support. I opened my mouth to yell, but could not. It lasted only a few seconds when the door opened and my friend entered the room. The vision was gone. I said to my friend with a detached calmness that I had just seen a ghost, but this of course was met with indifference. I did not press the matter, as I was already beginning with self-doubt. By the end of a mostly sleepless night, I had managed to convince myself that it was a dream, or at least a product of that period between sleep and wakefulness. Within days, the whole episode was forgotten. Some 6 months later, I was at home with my parents and decided upon an early night. I had a lot on my mind that night and needed some space and some quiet for contemplation. I was lying on my single bed in my small bedroom, lost in thought, when I heard the 3 knocks again. My heart leapt. From my bed, I could see ahead of me, and to the right, the bedroom door, which was open, and the landing is accessible by 3 ascending steps. Through the door, I can see about 3 yards of the landing until the angle of the door frame cuts off the view. There, just at that farthest point, was the same vision, the same shimmering colors. She was much clearer this time, and there was no doubt that my eyes were seeing a woman. She was so tall that she had to bend her head to her left until it was almost resting on her shoulder, like a body hanging without the noose. But she was looking at me. Her eyes, although I couldn't actually see them, were fixed upon me, and there was a malice in them, I had no doubt. Then, in an instant, she came along the landing, down the 3 steps, and right up to my face. So quickly and so aggressively, she brought her face to within an inch of mine. I could make out her eyes and nose, but to this day, I cannot be sure if I saw them or experienced them. I could not separate her emotions from her visage, which seemed to be one and the same in my mind. It is difficult to describe, but I saw her face and features, along with her hatred and despite. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came. Eventually, she disappeared. I've never been so terrified in all my life. Never has fear removed any capacity to utter or to move a single muscle, and yet this was the case. I lay rigid for some time, at least until the room was light from daybreak. I was absolutely sure that I had not fallen asleep, but yet over time, I managed to convince myself that this was indeed the case. This is how I came to terms with it. Over the next year, I saw no more of her, and she was reduced to an entertaining story for friends. Then I married and moved to set up house with my wife. The third, the last, and the unequivocal sighting was during the early days in my new home. It was a bright, warm Sunday afternoon, and I was sitting on a chair to watch a television program, an old episode of Bonanza, as it happens, when I became aware of another presence in the room. I turned to the door behind me, fully expecting my wife to be there, but she was not. As I turned my head back to the TV, to my right was a settee, and, sat in the middle, was the woman again. This time she was sat on the edge of the settee, with her hand forward, cupping her chin in her hands, and her knees were also together under her chin. She was leaning forward in this position, contemplating me amusingly, or mockingly. I cannot decide. There was so much clarity about her features, and the room was bright, which she seemed to reflect. There, in front of me was a woman, about 25 years old, very sharp features, very tall, and very thin. Her bright colors, her hair and her jewelry, reminded me of a punk rocker, although this was not so. I'm sure she was from a long time ago before that era. I was not afraid, and emboldened by the daylight,
I simply and calmly asked her what she wanted. There was no response, no answer. She simply faded away, and I have not seen her to this day. Compressing my research into a short paragraph, I went back to the place of the first sighting and asked my friend some questions. It transpired that she was haunted by a spirit many years previously who would disturb household objects. An expert was brought in, who ascertained that they were being haunted by a malevolent spirit who was called Mage. It was not possible to get rid of her, but to hope that she leaves of her own accord. This happened in my friend's hometown, some 300 miles from where I live. My theory is that Mage came with my friend to my hometown and took a liking to me, thereby following me to both my parents' home and onward to my married home. I don't know who has provided the vehicle for her to leave my house, but I hope that she has been gone for good. When I was in my early 20s, a friend and I decided to rent a house together. We found a lovely old house near the Mississippi River, and I was immediately drawn to it. After we moved in, we both began to notice banging on the walls and lights blowing out constantly. The lights we attributed to bad wiring, and the banging, I truly believed, was my friend, and she truly believed it was me. The layout of the house was one we had never seen before. There was a hallway that led from the front living area to the back bedroom areas that was at an odd, slanted angle. I always felt uncomfortable going down this hallway and found myself going around by way of the kitchen. After months, my friend and I decided to take in a third roommate to help with expenses. During the next month or so, after this third roommate moved in, we noticed an increase in frequency to the noises, banging, and lights going out. We also began to notice that every month, and this is really weird, right around the time that all three of us began our menstrual cycles, a very large stain began to appear in the middle of our living room floor. We tried constant shampooing, but it would always reappear immediately. Then after our cycles were finished, the stain would disappear on its own, only to reappear the next month. Our third roommate then became very withdrawn after only a short time of being in the house. She began to go directly to her bedroom and never came out except to go to work. Her personality has also changed drastically. She went from being very funny and outgoing to a complete loner. She would also say very inappropriate, weird things to us. We had known this girl for some time, and her behavior was quite unsettling. She finally told us that she was not comfortable in this house and was moving out, and she did so that very day. Shortly after she moved out, the banging noise began in earnest, and we started noticing our things being rearranged. We began to laughingly and nervously admit to each other that something was not right in this house. However, neither one of us felt threatened by any kind of the weird happenings, and in fact, I personally actually felt almost protected by it. We started to call our ghost George, and would talk to him whenever the banging would begin. We were trying to watch something on TV, and George would start banging or knocking. We would say, "Please, George, not right now. We're trying to see this." And he would actually stop, at least until the show was over. Unfortunately, no matter how much we begged him to stop putting the stain on the floor every month, that never ended. In fact, it got bigger and darker the longer we lived there. One kind of amusing episode happened to us one memorable evening. I decided to let my boyfriend at the time stay overnight with me, although I usually didn't do this. Just as we were dozing off, a very loud bang sounded, coming from the hallway. My boyfriend sat up and asked, "What the heck was that?" Immediately, a knocking began at the far end of the hall and rushed towards my room very fast, knocking louder and louder the closer it came. My boyfriend said, "That has to be your roommate being funny." I just laughed and tried to explain about our ghost, and that I thought he might be angry that I had a male friend overnight. He said that was bull and got up to investigate. Just as he came to the hallway, the knocking began again, all around him. Needless to say, my brave 6'4" boyfriend ran straight out the front door and never came back in the house. Anyway, after a few years, my roommate and I decided we were going to move to a cheaper apartment, closer to where we worked. As soon as we started packing, the noises, and especially the lights going out, began to get really bad. I was even starting to get a little frightened. One day, as we were finishing up packing, we decided to go check in the basement and see if we had anything left down there. While we were down there, we decided to go in the old fruit cellar, since neither one of us had actually looked in it. We found some old fishing equipment. We also found an old shirt box that was sealed with tape and felt kinda heavy, so we brought it upstairs and opened it up. Inside was a bunch of old pictures. Most of the pictures were of a young man of about 25 or 30. In many of the pictures, he was in our house and standing on the porch of the house. There were also some antique glass slides with pictures of him in the military uniforms. We dated the stuff around World War II. We decided to call our landlady, an elderly woman, around 80 years old, to tell her we had found the box. When we called her and told her what we had found, she hung up on us. We called back, and her daughter answered and said that they didn't want that stuff anymore, and we could have it or throw it away. We thought it was very strange, since normally our landlady was a sweet old lady, so we decided that some of the stuff in the box might be worth more money, and we would sell some of it. Some war medals, and even an old stock certificate. That night, I put the box on the kitchen table, and we went to bed. In the morning, we were going to move the last of everything, and as we were preparing to go, I asked my roommate what she had done with the box of stuff. She said she hadn't touched it. We looked everywhere and couldn't find it. Finally, around lunch, we got hungry and decided to cook a frozen pizza. We turned on the oven and immediately began to smell something burning. When I opened the oven, there was the box. Okay, I swore my roommate did it, and she swore I did it. So we left the box on the table again and left to move some things to the new place. When we got back, the box was gone again. This time, we found it immediately in the kitchen pantry, so we kinda laughed it off and put it back on the kitchen table. About 10 minutes later, I walked into the kitchen and it was gone again. I decided the heck with it and decided to just go finish the bedroom closet I had just minutes before been working on. When I stepped up on the chair to wipe off the upper shelves, there was the box. That did it. I said out loud, "Okay, George, we promise not to take your stuff," and put the box back in the fruit cellar where we had found it. We left that day and have never been back, but I've always wondered if the next tenants ever heard from George. I've worked for a domestic violence shelter for approximately 7 years. While I personally have never seen anything, there are always odd sounds and unusual occurrences. Let me start at the beginning. The house is 2-story with an attic and a basement and over 100 years old. I really don't know much else about its history. The local domestic violence center purchased the building, which had been uninhabited for a number of years, did some renovations, and began operating an anonymous shelter for battered women and their children. Over the years, there have been numerous sightings of a young couple. A woman in a long flowing dress can be seen periodically walking up the long staircase. A man in dark, old-fashioned clothing has been seen in the living room and at the top of the stairs outside the attic door. It is usual for all who went into the attic or the basement to feel uneasy, and not alone. Recently, the sightings seem to have increased. A church group came over to the holidays to sing Christmas carols to the residents, and a young boy pointed to the ceiling and said, "Look, there's an angel." The only thing seen by the others in the room was a hazy, grayish fog that wasn't in any particular shape. A few months later, one of the employees' daughter was in the living room, alone, working on a school project, and looked up to see a gray, transparent figure looming in the doorway. She screamed, and her mother raced in to see the figure moving slowly upstairs. It was as if the ghost was checking in and didn't mean to frighten the young girl. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of this haunting is that the couple together, fitting the same descriptions of the man and the woman seen in places of the house, have been seen in one bedroom upstairs. To my knowledge, at least 3 residents in the last year have been awakened at night to see the woman sitting on the edge of the bed with a man standing behind her. The couple has been described as comforting and reassuring to those who have seen them in this manner. And these apparitions have seemed to know when these residents were about to face a particular trying experience. One woman was going to court the next day for an order of protection. One lady was facing a decision about the custody of her new little baby. And one woman was about to embark on the dangerous underground trying to change her identity in order to hide from the husband who tried to kill her. All 3 of these women felt as though the ghosts were trying to tell them that everything was going to be alright, and, as it turns out, the dire situations facing each of these women worked out in their favor. I personally find their presence reassuring as well. Women and children who came through the shelter are very often depressed, sometimes hopeless, scared, insecure, and anxious. I think that the fact that they are comforted by these spirits is a sign that these are good spirits who seem to approve of the work being done in their house. They've never tried to scare anyone. Sure, lights turn on and off by themselves, and the dishwasher is forever turning on by itself. Maybe they are just trying to figure out what these gadgets are. I do not know anything about the history of that house, but I assume these spirits were once residents of this house. Based on their actions, they seem to be good and well-wishing. I hope they continue to watch over the shelter and help the current residents. I don't normally tell these stories to anyone because they sound outlandish, but I'm a professional as an MBA in English, and I've had some of the strangest things happen to me. The most memorable one was in the fall of 1990. I was a senior in high school, and my boyfriend and I were out with our best friend. Being a stupid teenager, I was riding on my boyfriend's lap in the front seat because we were just going to the park, which was only about 3 miles from where we were, and we lived in the middle of no man's land. There was a forest of trees in the middle of the fork. We were talking and carrying on, and my friend, Mike, took the left fork instead of the right fork. I looked up, fussing at him for taking the wrong road, when we saw this guy in a gray sweatshirt and blue sweatpants walk out of the trees right in front of the car. Of course, I thought we were going to wreck, so I braced my arm on the dashboard and ducked my head, preparing to be thrown through the windshield. I was screaming, but I felt no impact. When I looked up, we were on the right road going towards the park, and there was no one in front of the car. Of course, we stopped the car and mulled around for a few minutes, trying to see if maybe someone had wrecked in the trees, but there was no sign of anything. I do know that about 4 years before that, my brother had a good friend who died at that intersection while running from the cops after a domestic dispute. He never made the turn and went straight into the trees. He left behind 2 small children. Maybe it was him trying to go home. My next experience happened with a Ouija board, and I can promise I'll never touch another one. We were trying to contact a friend who had passed away about a year earlier. I asked him the proof he was who he said, and he gave us some details that each of us in the room would know about him individually, but not collectively. I asked him to prove he was there. I heard something happening in the laundry room, and I threw the board into the hallway and went to look. All the cabinets above the washer and dryer were open, and all the storage sheets were laying all over the floor. My cat's food and water had been pushed to the opposite side of the room. It was too scary for all of us. We camped out together in sleeping bags on the floor, as close to one another as we could. And this is my final story, because this one is happening presently. I had a daughter 2 years ago. I decided to pass on my middle name, which has been a family tradition for girls in our family for years, Grace. The wild thing is, my daughter was due on June 21st, which I thought was cool because it was my brother's birthday, but she was born on May 27th, 1996, exactly 1 year to the date of the death of my Aunt Grace, whom I loved during life. She was my godmother, and she never had any kids, and I felt it was a meaningful tribute to her. Anyways, getting to my point, my daughter was born very sick, but became healthy very quickly. She has grown into a radiant little girl. We have moved 5 times since she was born, my job and me traveling, and we finally decided to settle near one set of my grandparents, so she could have the loving support I never had. So we moved to Atlanta. The strange thing is, I've noticed that she always has the coldest room in the house. My husband makes a joke out of it, since he is always hot, that he doesn't know how we always do that. I believe it is my Aunt Grace watching over her, her guardian angel. I've been in her room, putting her to bed, reading her a story, and felt someone sit on the bed with us, with a great thud. My aunt was no little woman, but always a beautiful one. The strangest thing that has happened recently is that an old makeup case with a camel on it, with the powder still in it, has appeared in my home. I know I did not get this from my mom, because we do not speak. It sits in my bookcase. When my husband and I married, I decided to use her wedding band, but it causes blisters on my fingers, and always appears in the jewelry box that I keep in my daughter's room. So now I know. My Aunt Grace wants my daughter to have it, instead of me. I've always wondered what was going on in the house I grew up in. It was only 20 years old when we bought it. We knew the builders. It had only one owner since then, an old woman who kept cats. My mother bought the house when I was 4, and from day one, I was terrified to be in there. It just felt wrong. It was a small house, only 2 bedrooms, all on one level, with the exception of an attic and a basement. There were definitely sections of the house that felt safe, and sections that did not. The back bedroom closet, the bathroom, and the short steps and hallway leading to the back door and basement were not. The first bedroom, living room, and ironically enough, the kitchen, so as long as you put your eye on that back hall, were safe. The things that occurred in the house were experienced by the entire family, though my mother and older sister always had a reasonable explanation for them. Heavy breathing could often be heard. Mom's explanation, the swing set up the road creaking, footsteps across the ceiling, the neighbors. Now, our house sat alone and shared no walls, so how would we hear the neighbors going up their stairs inside their house? Items that were set down would suddenly vanish, only to reappear after much frantic hunting. But worse than that was the feel. People were loath to do anything that would make a loud noise. Vacuuming, showering, flushing the toilet, frying food, anything that made a cover-up noise. It always made you want to spin around and run when you couldn't hear past the noise you were making, as if for allowing something to sneak up on you. When anyone went down to the basement, which housed the washer and dryer, they inevitably ran down the stairs. Those stairs, you just didn't want to be caught on them. My mom was a compulsive decorator, and the only spot in the house that did not boast ornamentation was the hall leading to the basement stairs. Even she couldn't bear to be in there long enough to hang a picture. Once in the basement, the person felt compelled to keep a running, shouted conversation with whomever was upstairs. You did not want to be cut off down there. Sleeping in this house was a nightmare. The overwhelming fear of shutting off the light and daring to sleep. Myself and my niece both experienced this. In the back bedroom, too, there was a closet. The closet door had a tendency to suddenly slam open. My mom's explanation: it was hung crooked. When I was 14, tired of it, I put a latch on it. Some years later, the door flung itself open, hard enough to send the latch flying through the opposite window. Hung crooked indeed. The most terrifying event in the house was experienced by myself, my niece, and my dog. We were sleeping, both in my room. My sister was asleep on the sofa, and my mom in her room. Jennifer and I were awakened by a voice from the area of the basement calling my name. I thought it was my sister and asked her what she wanted. I woke her up. It had not been her. I woke my mom up. It wasn't her either. While I was talking to my mother, the voice came again, telling me to come to it. My niece asked my mom if she had heard it, and my mother replied that she had heard nothing, and that we were dreaming. Both of us, dreaming the same dream. Okay. It went on all night, and my dog, guardian of my well-being, hid under the bed and whimpered. We lived in the house for 17 years. During that time, we had bedding switched from one bed to another, tapes and records moved under furniture, and perhaps the most puzzling, we came home daily for a week to find bowls of hot food and cups of steaming tea set out as though someone had just been there, yet the house was locked. We had a neighbor watch the house to make sure the kids weren't coming in, but nobody was seen to enter. To this day, whenever my niece or myself have a nightmare, it is set in that house. No dreams that take place in the house turn out to be good ones. I've actually had dreams that were going along fine until I realized where I was. I also remember having a dream that I was married and my husband had purchased a house. He took me to see our new house, and you guessed it, it was 4 Harrison Court. In the dream, the most amazing wave of terror swept over me at the thought of stepping into the house again. We have no idea what was wrong with it. We know the woman who bought it from us, and she still lives in it. My children and I had a very bad experience with a demon in a house that we lived in. My son became very scared one night as he viewed the ghost of a man with a sword sticking out of its side. This ghost was standing in the doorway of my son's bedroom very late one night. He said that this thing was just giving him the feeling of such terrible hatred and dread. It made my son feel like it was going to kill us. My son started sleeping in my daughter's bedroom, and that thing started going from room to room, looking for my son, and so it started coming into our room and scaring the daylights out of me. I had felt the hatred and anger. I know that it would have killed us if we had not gotten our pastor out there. When our pastor pulled into our drive, he said he felt the anger and hatred just emanating from the house to the outside. He knew what we were up against, and we immediately started saying prayers and his army of saints to fight for us. Ultimately, it worked, so while we were living there, we had no more problems. But whenever we drive by, we cannot even look at the house. Reading some of the stories that your readers have sent you brought back a memory I thought I had long forgotten, and I would like to share it with you. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, it did not occur to me, but instead happened to a childhood friend of mine. Being an ex-army brat, part of my childhood was spent in a suburb just east of St. Louis called Spanish Lake. It was called that for a lake that was near there and a favorite hangout of many of the townspeople. A nice lake during the day, but at night, It was said that the ghost of a sunken Spanish galleon walked the shores of the lake, especially during the summer months, in search of what was unknown. At one time, I'd been told that several people had simply disappeared from there and were never heard from again. Truth or not, I will not venture a guess. The lake was also said to have a section that was bottomless, and there, supposedly, lay the Spanish galleon. Being teenagers and fearing nothing, several of us used to go there with our girlfriends or boyfriends and park. But one night, my friend told me he had learned his lesson and would never, ever go there again. I came out of my house one summer's day in 1971, and I saw Randy up the street, absolutely throwing a fit, yelling, screaming, cursing, and in general, having the proverbial cow. He was standing near his car, a 1966 Plymouth Roadrunner, in mint condition, or at least it almost was, now. Something you must understand is that this car was Randy's pride and joy. He babied the car, and it was one of the fastest cars in the area at the time, as well as one of the sharpest looking cars. It was a painted metallic turquoise and built to the hilt. I asked him what he was so pissed off about, and he showed me. What I saw scared the bejesus out of me. It looked as if someone, or something, had ran their fingers down the entire length of the passenger side of his car and completely melted the paint where they had touched the car. He told me that he and his girlfriend, the night before, had gone to their favorite spot on the lake to be alone. He told me that they had been there long enough to fog the windows a little. During a pause, for breath catching or something, one of them looked out the front window, seeing what appeared to be a sort of red glow emanating from the lake itself. At first they tried to ignore it, their attention on each other, but, unfortunately, they both became rather interested in it. Randy told me that within the glow, he started to make out what looked like a ball, just a little brighter than the glow itself. At this point, Randy told me that it appeared to start coming towards them. He told me that it looked like it was pulsing or something, almost as though it were alive. It came slowly towards them, and they got really scared. His girlfriend told him that she wanted to leave, right now. Randy told me that he tried to start the car, and absolutely nothing happened. Not one damn thing. It was almost as if all the power had been sucked from it. Meantime, the red glow continued towards them. He said his girlfriend became near hysterical, wanting to leave, but he told her that, try as he might, there was nothing he could do, and he was not about to get out of the car to find out either. All they could do was make sure the doors were locked, and the windows were up as far as they would go, and wait. He said that after a short time, the red glow completely surrounded them, and his car began a slow rocking motion at first. Then, without warning, Randy told me that the car began to rock more violently, and he said he and his girlfriend could hear a growling or something of the sort anyway. Then he told me that he could hear a scraping sound down the passenger side of his car. He said the best way he could describe the sound was like someone scraping their fingernails down a chalkboard. Randy said this went on for several more minutes. He wasn't sure for how long, and all he and his girlfriend could do was sit there and hold one another. She, of course, in tears, and Randy very nearly there himself. Suddenly, he said, the growling stopped, the scraping ceased, and the glow was gone. It simply wasn't there anymore. Shaking, he reached for the ignition switch and tried turning the key. He said the car started right away, and they got the heck out of there, not looking back once, and were grateful when they were back up on the main road and heading into town. By the time Randy had been able to calm his girlfriend down and get her home. It was very late, so he decided to just go home and try to get some sleep, but not before trying to see what kind of damage had been done. Randy told me that after he had gotten home, he went into the house, got his flashlight, and went back outside. He said that at the time, he saw absolutely nothing, and after very careful examination too. But the next morning, his brother had wakened him, wanting to know what happened to his baby. That's when he discovered what he had. He tried several times after to fix the problem, but within a few days, the fingerprints would reappear, just as if they were fresh. Shortly after that, I left Spanish Lake. I was told that Randy eventually got rid of his car, and I heard nothing more of it. But to be honest with you, I've not been too awfully curious either. When I was about 13 years old, I used to babysit quite a lot in my neighborhood. Back then, I didn't believe in ghosts or the paranormal. I lived in upstate New Jersey at the time. My foster family had recently moved into a new housing development in a small suburban town near the New York state border. The house next door to us was an old farmhouse. The housing development had been built on what had been the farm. The farmhouse had supposedly been built during the mid to late 1700s. When I came home from a babysitting job late one night, I looked out at the window for several minutes at the stars, trying to find the different constellations, as was my habit just about every night. Then, I saw a ball of mist, which appeared to be walking down the middle of the road. I thought that it must be some kind of gas or water vapor, although I'd never seen anything like it in my life. It seemed so deliberate. It never veered from the road. I watched it go to the end of the block and make a right into the woods that led to New York State. It was weird, but I figured that there must be some rational explanation for it. The couple who had just moved into the old farmhouse needed a babysitter for a Saturday night for their 4-year-old daughter. I agreed to babysit. I arrived at the couple's house about 7 p.m. on a hot summer night. As soon as I entered their house, their Doberman Pinscher ran up to me and started barking at me and howling. He wouldn't stop regardless of what the couple tried to do. His howls became shrill and he began to growl at me. I'd never been afraid of animals, as I'd grown up around dogs and I like animals very much. This dog really scared me just the same. The husband put the dog down in the garage, where it finally stopped howling. I met the little girl, and then the mother put her to bed in her upstairs bedroom. When the couple left, I turned on the TV. Despite the hot night, there was not even as much as a fan in the house, yet the house was comfortably cool. At about 10 or 11 p.m. that night, the TV began to have interference, and the lights dimmed noticeably. The television began to get so much interference that it became impossible to watch. The lights dimmed even more. I thought that there must be something wrong with electrical wiring in the old house. I sat by the light and began to read. The house was becoming cooler. Despite the hot night outside, this house was becoming cold. There was an Afghan on the back of the couch, which I wrapped around me. I went to the window, wondering why it was suddenly becoming cold. The window pane was warm. It was certainly warmer than the house was at the moment. I tried to open the window to let the warm air in, but I could not budge any of the windows. The outside world looked so strange from inside the house, as though you were looking at something far away, or looking at a picture of something rather than reality. Then I began to hear what sounded like a light footfall at the top of the stairs. I could only hear them coming down, but not up, on about the top 1/3 of the stairway. I looked to see if this little girl had gotten up, but she was sound asleep, with her sheet tucked in around her. As I sat reading, The footfall became closer and got louder. I stood by the stairway and watched. I saw nothing, but could still hear the footfall. I thought that this old house must be still settling to be making all this noise. Then, the footfalls began a pounding and seemed to reach the end of the stairwell. They were closer together, loud and insistent, but always only descending the staircase, never ascending it. Then, I heard a loud bang from the room, directly in line with the stairway at the top. I raced to the room, thinking that I might find a little girl there, or a small animal which might have gotten into the house and knocked something over. I turned on the light to the room. The room was very cold, and the light was very dim. The child was not there, and nothing was out of place. I recalled promptly from the small frigid room. The hairs at the back of my neck were standing up, and I felt a strange sensation, as though a current of electricity was coursing through my spine to the base of my skull. I checked on the little girl, who was sound asleep despite the racket, and still tucked her snugly into her bed. At this point, I was getting scared, but figured that there must be some rational explanation for what was happening. The footsteps continued their pounding, but now they descended all the way to the foyer. There was a deep shag carpet runner along the foyer. I could hear creaking floorboards beneath it and indentations in the carpet as though someone were pacing on it. I thought that there must be some really small animal on the carpet and decided to try to catch it. I planted myself in the middle of the carpet when something came over me. Everything went dark for a second. I felt as though someone had thrown something over my head, and for a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. This was no small animal. I was petrified. I ran up the stairs to check the child, and she was still fast asleep. After the incident on the carpet, the foothills started making their way up the staircase. It was like a playback of what had been going on most of the night, only in reverse. By the time the foothills reached the top third of the stairwell, they'd stopped the incessant pounding and were only slightly stepping, yet still only descending the stairway. Finally, they disappeared entirely. The lights resumed their brightness, and the television was no longer bothered by the interference. By this time, it was about 2 a.m., and the stairwalking had gone on for several hours. All through this, there had been not one peep from the dog in the garage. The couple returned home about 4 a.m. They asked me if everything had been all right. I had felt as though I had been losing my mind. I just told them that everything had been okay. The next day, my foster sister made a point of asking me, how did the babysitting go? I told her, the house is really weird. Then she told me, I didn't want to tell you before you went babysitting because I didn't want to scare you. She proceeded to tell me that the former owners had told her that the house was haunted. They told her that all the members of the family had seen the ghost many times. They explained that one of the original owners of the house, a Mr. H, had committed suicide by hanging himself from the attic door, which was directly above the top landing of the stairwell. They'd taken my sister for a tour of the house. When they had been renovating the house, they had discovered that the house beams and studs had been joined together by wooden pegs and not nails. This was a very old construction technique that was used because making wooden pages was easier than having to make nails. They took my foster sister for a tour of the cellar, which consisted of a maze-like collection of windowless cubicles. In each of the cubicles were manacles for hands and feet. Had Mr. H bought slaves to use as farm workers? In that area, the growing season is short and the winters are long and cold. Buying slaves would hardly have been cost-effective for such a short period of time. Long ago, the land there had belonged to the Rampo Indians. Had Mr. H taken these people as seasonal slaves and dispensed with them after harvest time? My friends went down to the town city hall to check the records of the house. The records show that the house was considerably newer than had been thought, about mid-19th century. This was after the slavery had been discontinued in the Northeast. The former owners of the house, who were also builders and renovators of old houses, said that the mode of construction that was used in the house would date the house as being much older. I guess we'll never know who was kept manacled in those airless little rooms in the cellar. We'll never know why Mr. H was driven to suicide, or if his death was indeed a suicide. Was the ghost that of Mr. H, or of someone else? Perhaps there is more than one tormented spirit in that troubled household. I'm from a very small town in Madison Parish, Louisiana. One cold February night, my 5 sisters and I were going to visit my dad's brothers, as was a habit of ours to do, a couple of times during the week. My father had a work van in which the motor was encased on the inside of the van. Since it only had a driver's seat and a passenger seat, some of us had to sit on top of the motor case. This night, in particular, we took a different route to our uncle's home for some reason unknown. As we turned onto a side street, only one of my other sisters and I saw a woman with long flowing brown hair down to her waist in a long flowing white nightgown glide across the street about 1 or 2 blocks ahead of us. My sister and both looked at each other at the same time and said, "Did you see that?" 1 second she was to our left, and the next she was across the street and then just vanished. When we got home later that night, I told my mother what my sister and I had seen. She said that many, many years ago, I'm not sure if it was in the early 1900s, a young lady who lived in that area was to be married. On her wedding night, her fiancé was tragically killed before the wedding could take place. The bride, who was very much in love with her fiancé, pined away and died from the grief of her loss. My mother said that my sister and I were not the only ones who had seen this lady. I'll never forget the apparition that I saw that night, and I truly believe that what I saw was a ghost from the past. I suppose that every kid imagines a monster in a closet or under the bed at one time or another, and I had in fact began to believe my experience to be the result of a young fertile imagination. You see, my room was located in the basement of my parents' home. Located next to the basement stairs, my closet ran under the stair and had only an open doorway, no door. As I lay trying to sleep at night, I was sure I could discern a pair of glowing red eyes staring at me from the closet doorway. This always filled me with a sense of fear and trepidation. I could never quite make out the body of the apparition, more like having an idea of the shape and size, but never really seeing it. I also had the strange feeling that the apparition indeed wished me ill. Furthermore, there was some force that restricted it to the closet. However, as I said, I'd begun to doubt the evidence of my own experience. Until years after I'd left the family home, my cousin came to stay with my mom and dad due to family difficulties. She stayed in my former room. Mom informed me that she was having trouble sleeping. However, she could not seem to get her to give any reason as to her apparent insomnia. My mother asked me to talk to her, fearing her difficulties stemmed from the problems in the family. She further believed that being closer in age might make it easier for her to open up. She described to me exactly the same manifestation I had imagined when I slept in that room. After a room change, she was once again able to sleep comfortably at night. My friend Christy is engaged to this guy named Sean. Sean has lived for most of his life at his parents' house in Cincinnati, Ohio. Sean's house is very old and just happens to be in a development that is situated over an old Indian burial ground. For as long as Sean can remember, there has been a ghost in the house. It imitates the voices of people who live in the house. There are many instances of Sean or his sisters being alone in the house and hearing one of their parents begging for help downstairs, only to go to the parent's aid and discover that the parent is not in the house. Sean even recorded it once while he was recording himself playing drums. In addition, there is a spirit that follows them and visitors around the house. It is a tall, dark figure wearing a hooded cloak. It has never harmed anyone, but merely made them feel uncomfortable. About a year ago, Christy made a trip out to Cincinnati to meet Sean's parents for the first time. He didn't want to tell her about the house because he didn't want to spook her. Sean's parents invited her to stay in the guest room, and Christy accepted. The first night of the visit, Christy was sound asleep when she woke up suddenly and felt something icy slide over her and felt like something was watching her. She got spooked and went over to Sean's room and slid into bed with him and stayed there for the rest of the night. Sean didn't tell her at the time, but the hooded figure followed her into the room. The same thing happened the next night, and Sean finally told her. She refused to stay in the house another night. When I was about 4 or 5, maybe even younger, I remember one night I was sleeping in my room and I awoke. I don't know why I did. I may have been dreaming. Anyways, I looked ahead of me to my wall and there was a face on it. It was blue, looked human, and this may sound strange, but I had a hat on that looked like one of those Arabian towels that they wrap their heads with. It spoke to me. I don't remember what it said, but oddly, I wasn't afraid of it. I don't remember the reaction, but I asked my mom if she remembered about when I told her there recently, and she said I used to tell her about a lady in blue visiting me quite often. I only remember telling her about my only experience once. I might have seen the face more than I remember. I don't think it was a dream, because I don't think I would remember a dream I had when I was 5 or younger. I'm 15 now, so it was at least 10 or more years ago. That's my experience. If anyone has had an experience similar to mine, please write me about it. I've only had one paranormal experience. It happened last October when my boyfriend had temporarily rented a trailer. We had lived there for almost 2 months and nothing out of the ordinary had happened. One afternoon, he decided to take a nap and I was in the living room watching TV. I started hearing this really strange continuous screeching noise. It sounded like it was coming from inside the wall beside his bedroom door. When I walked over there, it stopped. I sat back down and started watching TV again, and it started back again. This time, I walked into the kitchen. The bedroom was right beside the kitchen, and I started opening the bottom cabinets, and once again, the screeching stopped. I never said anything about it to my boyfriend because I didn't think about it at the time. A couple of days later, we were in the kitchen eating breakfast, and he told me that the day before, when he was there by himself, that he had heard a weird, loud, screeching noise. He said he tried to find where it was coming from, and it would stop when he'd look. I told him that the same thing had happened to me while he was asleep a few days earlier. We both talked about ghosts and laughed about it, pretty much dismissing it as a joke. A few nights later, his mom came and stayed the whole night and was asleep on the living room couch. This particular night, we were sleeping in the bedroom on the opposite end of the trailer. It was really late, probably around 3 a.m., and we had been laying there talking when I started hearing this noise. It was kind of like the screeching, but much quieter, and screeched in intervals, like footsteps. I thought my boyfriend had dropped over the side of the bed, making that noise with his hand against the plastic on the mattress. I said, "Brian, quit making that noise." He said, "I'm not making that noise," and held up both of his hands. He looked at me as scared as I looked back at him, and he said, "Get up and get dressed." As soon as he said that, you could actually tell where the screeching was moving through the room to the corner beside the bed and feel this undiscernible presence, and all of a sudden, the screeching just went crazy and so loud. It was right there. Needless to say, within a split second, it was the only one there. Now you can imagine 2 grown adults running into the living room to wake up his mom. She said she hadn't heard anything, but that we had scared her to death, running through the living room at 3 a.m. in the morning like we were on fire. We sat up in the living room for the rest of the night and moved back to my mom's house within the week. So far, that's the only experience that I've had. While I was working at a hospital in town, I had the opportunity to come in contact with many ghosts. I worked on the geriatric floor, and elderly people died there every day. If the power suddenly went out and immediately came back on, a person had just died. This happened every time. One of the most notable apparitions that I've personally seen was a man with a cane that is seen wandering the halls at night. People admitted to the hospital would often report tapping sounds and seeing an old man's face grinning at them from the hospital door, which all of them had. One lady of about 80 kept telling me that she saw this man's face in the mirror in the bathroom, and that half of his face would look badly beaten and disfigured. There have been reports of a cloaked man praying over the dead bodies of the recently departed. I can remember one incident where I walked into the morgue and I saw a body that was recently pronounced dead and covered. I could have sworn that I saw the fading presence of this monk kneeling over the body for a few seconds, then disappear. I would feel the air in the room be so cold, but after he vanished, it warmed up. Another popular ghost at the hospital was the Grim Reaper. The Reaper was a dark figure that would come through the window at the end of the hallway. He would shut doors, touch you on the shoulder, etc. Late at night, you could feel that someone was there, and you would see a dark figure out of the corner of your eye. As soon as you looked up, he was gone. My favorite story to tell is this. I was helping a woman get her bath early one morning. I was asking her how she slept, how she felt, etc. She told me that she did not get a wink of sleep because of the man's face she saw in the window. She said that she thought it was tree branches, but she got up in the middle of the night and saw that it was a man's face staring at her through the window. This woman was just in the hospital for a kidney infection. She wasn't on any drugs that would make her hallucinate. On third shift, you could hear children giggling and hear them running up and down the halls, but there are no children on the floor. If you went past the operating room at night, it would be locked, but inside, you could hear instruments clanging and things being thrown around.
Haunted church stories seem to be popping up frequently lately, and I'm here to say that I have a brief story that'll involve just that. There's this Catholic church that I used to constantly clean. This was in Vermont, and the church had to have been built in the late part of the 19th century. Very beautiful windows, looked immaculate. Anyway, I used to work as a janitor cleaning the halls late at night, when I would be the only one there. There were many times when I would hear the organ notes playing repeatedly. I would hear the echoes of human voices speaking together, like whispers, and sometimes even clear words. One night, I was cleaning around the church once again. I was all the way at the end of the church when I heard the organs going off. It wasn't the usual sound either. It sounded monstrous, as if someone was literally stomping on the organs. I looked immediately in the direction of where the organ sounds were coming from, and I could have sworn I saw a cloaked figure at the organ and playing it. It was the typical transparent-looking apparition, and when I walked even closer to get a better look, the figure had seemed to disappear. That was, of course, the worst of what I had witnessed, but there were times where I would see the organ once again playing by itself. I'd see a note or two being pushed down by itself when nobody else was in the room, and it was quiet. Anyway, that's all I have to report. I don't work at this church anymore, I'm happy to say, but I thought it was worth sharing. I wish I could say that this wasn't a real experience, but unfortunately, I can't. At least this will always make for an entertaining read. My name is Shannon. I'll be 18 in 11 days. I live in Georgia, and I'm writing to you because I feel so alone. For as long as I can remember, I've dealt with ghosts. I don't know what they are or what they want from me, but they seem to follow me. For the first 5 years of my life, I lived in a trailer in Mississippi. I can only recall one incident from them, because I was so young. I remember it was a beautiful day in spring, and I was sitting on a picnic table in our backyard, making mud pies, when suddenly, I heard what I thought to be my mother's voice calling me from the woods. I started to follow it. The closer I got, the further out into the deep woods the voice seemed to go. I almost followed it all the way into the woods, thinking my mother was calling me, but suddenly, I heard my mother's real voice calling me from the trailer. I turned and saw her waiting for me next to the picnic table, so I ran back and told her what had happened. She, of course, said that it was my imagination. About 12 years ago, our family moved here to Hiram. Every single night for years, I was terrified to sleep because I saw shadow people. They were like three-dimensional shadows that looked like people. I saw them in my room at night after my parents would put me to bed. When I'd call my parents into the room, they would turn on a light and the shadow people would be gone. They said it was my imagination. Lots of other things have happened, and there have been witnesses to some of the events. The house will shake at times. The doors will open and close on their own. I've seen dolls move on their own. A glass has exploded in my hand for no reason. I know glasses will explode from temperature changes, but there was no change in temperature at all. There was a music box that music would play in other rooms of the house when the music box wasn't around. I've heard footsteps when no one was home or awake. I've heard voices. The list goes on. I thought maybe that there was something wrong with me, so I went to a psychiatrist. She said that there's nothing wrong with me. I've learned to verify that I'm really hearing something, because even my cats notice something and hear a lot of things. If they hear it too, their ears perk up. I've tried talking about it before, and they either don't believe me and think I'm making it up,
or they think I'm crazy. I really feel alone, and it would be nice if you could give me some sort of guidance. What should I do? Should I do anything? Well, I apologize for the long email. I'm sure that you get a lot of mail every day, and I hate to add to the pile. Thank you for your time. My name is Luann. I'm 19 years old and live in a little redneck town in Virginia. I live with my grandparents and have lived all my life. My mom was 14 and in the 8th grade. My mom had a very best friend named Wendy, who was 13. They did everything together. Soon after our house was built, Wendy's parents were not getting along and were going through some separation and divorce procedures. Wendy and her mother had moved to Woodbridge, Virginia, soon. During the time of the separation, Wendy spent a great deal at my mom's newly built house. They spent much of their time in my mom's room, which is now my room. Then came the time for Wendy and her mom to move. It was very early one morning. Wendy was in the back of the van, holding a glass coffee table steady. This was in the days before seatbelt laws. There was a drunk driver on the road and hit the van head on. Everyone made it out with semi-serious or minor injuries, but not Wendy. The corner of the glass coffee table hit her in the head and killed her instantly. Years later, in 1985, a week before my mom found out she was pregnant with me, she was in the family room talking to my grandparents about going on birth control. My grandmother and my uncle both caught a glimpse of a girl standing behind my mother, and after that 2-second glimpse, she was gone. My uncle and grandmother agreed that it looked like Wendy. Oh, and she was actually shaking her head when she appeared. We believe that she was shaking her head because she knew my mom was pregnant and didn't want her to go on birth control. Ever since then, everyone in my family has caught a glimpse of her in our house. I usually never get any negative feelings when she materializes, but there was one moment I witnessed her ghost that completely terrified me. I was in the shower, I was home alone, and I had the door completely wide open. It was late evening, and I heard the door to the bathroom slam shut. It startled me so much, so I got dressed and headed out the door. I could have sworn I heard my name being called in a gentle, quiet whisper. It sounded like a little girl. I go downstairs and walk into the living room, and then I see the lights flickering. I also start to hear the sounds of footsteps walking across our hardwood floors. At this point, I thought I had an intruder in the house. I go to call the police, and after I hang up, I rush upstairs to hide in my bedroom. The thing was, as I was running upstairs, I could have sworn I saw the presence of a little girl, in black, in the corner of my eye as I ran for the stairs. It was only for a couple seconds, and of course, my mind was just thinking about hiding from this intruder. I could have just been seeing things, but I swear, I saw a girl for a second. The police showed up, of course, couldn't find anyone, and all was quiet. My parents came home, and I told them what happened. They were just happy that I was safe. It wasn't until a few days later that I realized it could have been Wendy. Because my room used to be my mom's room, she's in my room most of the time. I feel her presence there a lot. When I'm upset, no matter where I am in the house, I can feel her there. No one has seen her until my mom became pregnant. My family believes that she was sent to watch over her best friend's daughter. This happened to my cousin and I in late '02, in a ranch-style house my family and I used to live in. My cousin woke up in the middle of the night to my voice, or so she thought it was my voice. She looked at me, and I was sound asleep and not talking. Also that night, it was probably 4 or 5 in the morning, and I felt someone pecking on my knee, and it wasn't my cousin because she was sound asleep, so I just thought it was my imagination. As we were eating that morning, my cousin had told me what she had heard. I freaked because I knew that whatever had pecked me on my knee was not my imagination. Nothing was ever actually seen in this house, but a lot of things were felt and heard. A few months after that incident, my cousin was staying the night again. Everyone in the house had been asleep for 2 or 3 hours, but my cousin, she was so addicted to the game The Sims, and she was still on the computer. As she was shutting down the computer, she heard voices coming from the hallway directly to her right. She looked down there and saw nothing. The voices she heard, she knew were not any of ours, so she ran to the floor where she had made her bed and covered her head up. I guess the voices must have stopped after that. A lot of times I would hear cabinets shut, dishes clank together, and other odd unexplainable noises. One night, my brother got home from a friend's house around 1 or 2 in the morning. I'd been asleep on the couch in the living room for at least 4 hours, and my parents had been asleep in their room for about the same amount of time. As my brother got out of his car, he looked towards the door that went directly into the living room from the outside. It had a little window on it. He could see the light from the TV that I always left on at night, but he also saw a black figure looking at him from the inside. He ran in the house and noticed I was on the couch sound asleep. Then he went into my parents' room and asked if they'd been up, and they hadn't. What is scary is that the thing was in the same room with me. The next night, I slept on the couch again. Do not ask me why. My brother was not home yet, and my parents had went to bed. I was watching TV, and I got kind of uneasy, so I laid down and covered up my head. After a while, I heard the glasses in the kitchen sink clanking together. I started to sweat. Then I felt as if someone was coming into the living room, where I was. When my brother arrives home, and the noises stop, I got up and looked at the dishes in the sink, and none of them had been moved. About 14 years ago, we moved into a house that was built in the 1950s. I believe that used to be a boarding house and was right in front of a cemetery. There were lots of noises heard there, and a few spirits as well. I remember staying home one day from school, and my mom was asleep because she worked nights, and I heard a voice say my name. It scared me because we were the only ones home, and it was a voice I had never heard before. My mom would be home during the day by herself, while my brother and I were at school, and she would hear a music box playing. At the time, we had music boxes, but they did not play the song she heard. My mom would be sleeping on the couch, and she would hear footsteps coming through the kitchen, which was right next to the living room where she was. One time, when that happened, she grabbed her shoes and didn't come back till we got out of school. She also would be sleeping in her bed, and it would start shaking. This also happened to me. The shed in this house was directly behind my parents' bedroom, because their bedroom used to be a garage. Well, anyway, my mom would be lying on her bed, and she would hear someone or something walking in there. The odd thing was, it sounded like boots on wood, but the floor in there was concrete. We had a little dog out there at the time, but there is no way it could have sounded like that when it walked. One night, my mom, dad, and brother, we were all sleeping in my room because we put the air conditioner in there in the summer. Well, anyway, it was a cool night, so they had turned the air off and left the door open. My mom, for some reason, looked at the doorway and felt as if there was a presence there. She just put her face into my dad's back and went to sleep. The next day, she found out that her beloved dad had died, who lived in Kansas, and hadn't been found for a few days. She believes that it was him in the doorway. My brother saw a ghostly head in his bathroom one night. It was in a mist and was bald on top with hair around the edges of his head. We believe it was my great-grandpa. This happened at my grandma's house on September 2nd, 2004. It was my grandma's birthday and my mom, my little cousin, and I went there to have cake and ice cream. Well, my little cousin decides she wants a Miracle Whip sandwich. She pressed up against the door frame, asking my grandma if she could have a sandwich, when all of a sudden, she looked towards the microwave in the kitchen and screams, drops the jar, and runs to the couch where my grandma is, and my little is crying hysterically. We were all like, what just happened? For some reason, I became very cold and got goosebumps and had the urge to sit up. My little cousin wouldn't tell us what she saw. My grandma tried to tell us it was a mouse or a bug, but I highly doubt it, because she wouldn't have acted like she did. My grandma believes in ghosts, but I think she said that to make herself feel better, because she knew she was going to be there alone when we left. My little cousin, I believe, has forgotten about the incident, so I did not know what happened. Other things have happened at the grandma's, like something kicked her bed very hardly one night, and she also seen the spirit of a young girl dressed in white one day while lying on her couch in her living room. She's seen a shadow-like figure outside her window, which she knows wasn't human because her cat started hissing and acting weird, and there's probably been other things that happened that I do not know about. I don't believe I've actually ever seen a spirit, but I know I felt them because in certain places, or sometimes when I talk about the spirits, the back of my neck starts to hurt and feels weird, and sometimes my head will start hurting. I have so many stories to share with you, but I will send them at a later time. My cousin and I were out in Glenpool, towards the boondocks where my grandparents used to live, watching TV late at night. We weren't really tired, hyped up on caffeine from Pepsi and Sprite, just hanging out and trying to see how long we could go without passing out to sleep. At first, I thought I was just hearing things, or my cousin thought I was being a jerk and screwing around. But the louder the sound got, and closer, that's when we both turned the volume down. We then went to turn to each other and ask the same question. Was that you? Did you hear that? Of course, it was like a scratching, shuffling sound outside, and we both dismissed it, thinking that perhaps it was the family pets or wild animal, since the house was out in the middle of nowhere. Instead, curiosity got the better of us. I suggested that maybe it was a ghost, and she promptly crawled towards the window for a peek. She didn't say anything, standing still, like if she moved something would see her. I started to talk, but she silenced me with the wave of her hand. When I got over to the glass, I stared off into the black yard, expecting to see a deer or something. Instead, what I saw was a thing. Best word used to describe it. It was all black, nearly invisible in the shadows it clung to. The only way we were able to see it all was due to a distant light pole. It was skirting around. I guess the dogs must have felt the tension in the air, because at that moment, they all went into wild barks at this intruder. It swung its head, or what seemed like a head, towards the sound of the barks, then up to the window we both watched it from. There was nothing there, no face, nothing at all. Needless to say, both of us were terrified to see a hooded, faceless figure staring back at us. It disappeared, melting into the shadows. The dogs yipped, dashing for cover. Both me and my cousin were cold, shocked, afraid, and speechless. We don't know what it was looking for in our yard, or what it was at all. I used to believe it was a person thinking of robbing our house, or at least I tell myself that so I don't get freaked. Though the truth seems a lot creepier, it is still the truth, and neither I nor my cousin can deny that. When I was 11 years old, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to hear the sound of my dad plowing our driveway. He soon left for work, and I couldn't fall back asleep. After all was quiet, I got out of my bunk bed and climbed down my stairs and walked into the hallway. I went to the bathroom and then back to my room. I climbed into bed and crawled over towards my pillow. It was then that I turned around and was about to pull my blankets over me when I noticed two bright green lights in the corner of my room, directly in front of me. They were glowing and hovering in the same spot I just walked through. I was confused and tried to think of all the possible things they could be. Smoke alarm light? Glow-in-the-dark plastic stars? Anything? I started to get more scared as the time passed because I tried to eliminate the fact that it could be a spirit. I tried to figure out if it was my eyes playing tricks on me. Perhaps I saw the lights from a clock and my eyes just needed to adjust to the darkness. I didn't turn any lights on while I got up. I blinked my eyes in a different spot on my wall and tried to see if the lights would follow my eyes. They didn't. At this point, I looked back to the spot and there they were. I was so scared. They were eyes, and they were staring at me. I was terrified. I couldn't move at all. I was laying down resting on my elbows, just staring at them. They moved forward a foot or so, very slowly. Then, they moved back, and just as slowly, vanished to the left through my wall. I was so scared they would come back, and that's the end of the story. Riverdale Road has a lot more than just that certain place by 132nd. Riverdale Road is spooky throughout the entire road. It's weird. Sometimes the road stretches and shrinks. The bad side of the road actually starts on 104th, North Glen, and goes all the way to the end of the Highway 7, Boulder. But anyway, from 104th to Highway 7 is approximately 13 to 15 miles. I was paying attention to the mileage, and I was going about 35 to 40 the entire time. I started at 104th, and by the time I got to Highway 7, I had only gone 9 miles when I turned around to go back the other way towards 104th again. When I got there, I went 16 miles. Now tell me that isn't creepy. If you pay real close attention to the road, you could almost see it stretching. There's also this turn called Dead Man's Curve. It's a real sharp turn. The recommended speed is 25, but easily done at 40. There's a cement block wall bordering one side of the turn. If you turn that corner around 2:30 a.m., you will see a woman in the middle of the road, holding her hands up, waving for you to stop. When I went around that corner, I didn't have time to stop because she's right there after you do a half 90-degree turn. I ended up hitting her. I got out of my car and looked all around. Absolutely no one was around, but there were handprints on the hood of the car. Also, if you turn onto Riverdale from 112th and turn left, there will be a huge line of trees on the either side, and it just looks like a dark cave of trees. And there's a very mean jogger spirit that hitchhikes and jogs around there. My sister and I were driving around on that road and went through that little cave of trees, and she said she first got a glimpse of the light on his shoes on the left side going away from 104th, and as you get closer you can see that it's a person, and he was holding out his hands for hitchhiking. Then all of a sudden knelt down in the running position, and as soon as we got close enough he jetted out in front of us. My sister said that there were bodily fluids and body parts all over on the windshield, and she blinked, and it was all gone. She said as soon as he knelt down getting ready to run, she saw that his face was just a skull, and his hand was bones. So yeah, it's not just that spot right by 132nd. There are millions of ghost and spirit stories for that road, believe me. I've gone up and down that road billions of times. I used to do it about 5 to 7 times a day for about a year, so I know that road pretty well. I moved to Overland Park, Kansas, during my 6th grade year, along with my brother, stepfather, and brother. The 5-story house we lived in was in a new neighborhood, and I never took the time to research the land on which our neighborhood was built. Of course, I didn't know what experiences I would find myself in throughout the next few years. My night's routine consisted mostly of sitting in the sunroom on the 4th floor that looked towards the hallway leading to the 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a linen closet, and the staircase which led to the master bedroom, while reading whatever book I had at hand. I can't recall how long it had been since my family and I moved into the house. However, I remember this night clearly. My parents went out to eat, and I stayed behind, at home. I was curled into the corner of a sofa that sat in front of a set of windows, reading Guardian by John Saul. The first incident happened well after the night sky had darkened. I was concentrating heavily on my book when I began to hear a knocking coming from outside. It sounded almost exactly like someone hammering on the side of the house. Looking up from my book, I turned and looked outside to see who could be outside at such a time. However, I couldn't see anyone. So I turned around and made myself comfortable to engross myself in my book. Again, the banging continued, and the most effort I put into looking out the window again was angling my head and looking out of the corner of my eye. After a few minutes, the sound outside stopped, only to begin inside. This time, it sounded as someone was banging a hammer on the pipe in the basement, 3 floors below. The banging was 4 or 5 short clangs, and then silence. I'd raise my book again until I was interrupted by another round of clangs. The only thing I can do was try my best to ignore it. As I continued to read, I experienced this unnerving feeling of being watched. I tried to reposition myself on the couch, shifting my legs from underneath me and stretching out, but nothing would unshake their presence. I finally settled on propping my feet on the table and resting the book on my knees. It was then where I could see in my peripheral vision a man standing on the top step of the staircase leading to my parents' bedroom. He stood in complete black, perfectly still, and watched. When I looked directly at him, he disappeared. I figured all the noises and the man I saw were a result of reading the book, and because of this conclusion, I refused to look up at the staircase again, regardless of the fact that the man was still there. I never spoke of the clanging or the man once my parents came home, because I figured it was my imagination. My parents were arguing when they came home anyway, so I tried my best not to get in their way. Most of my time was spent in my room when there were others in the house. You could blame it on adolescence and wanting to be by myself. It was there in my room where another strange incident occurred. I had my radio cranked to the highest decibel and was rocking out when I heard a knock on my door. Turning down the radio, I rushed to the door and opened it to find no one standing outside. I shrugged, thinking I was hearing noises due to the loud radio, closed the door, and cranked the radio back up again. A few minutes later, I heard the knocking again, but this time, instead of turning down the radio, I opened the door while the radio blared. Again, no one stood at my door. I walked into the bathroom, which was immediately to my right, and checked behind the drawn shower curtain because my mother would love to hide and jump out behind me as I walked down the hallway. Well, she wasn't going to get me this time, only she wasn't behind the curtain. I walked down the entire hallway, checking the kitchen and bedrooms before going to my parents' bedroom. It, too, was empty, so I hightailed it to my bedroom, shut the door, and sat on my bed. I figured whoever wanted to come in would, so I no longer answered the knocks. Whoever it was knocked twice more and then stopped. Months passed, and the knockings continued, and the man stood on the top step of the staircase. After a while, I became so used to it, but I never mentioned it to anyone in my house. I always figured it was my mind playing tricks on me. Eventually, the sounds and the man disappeared, and I never experienced them again until years later. My mother and I were standing on the back porch one night while she smoked a cigarette. No one was allowed to smoke inside because my younger brother was an asthmatic. While she smoked, she mentioned, "I see people in this house." I casually looked at her and replied, "You too?" I can't remember the look on her face, but the sound of her voice distinguished her fear. She told me that she continuously saw 3 people standing on the staircase leading to her bedroom. Only the people she saw were dressed in white. She said that the people she saw stood on the stairs day and night, whereas the person I saw was dressed in black and only stood at the top of the stairs at night. She told me of a night when she was smoking in the garage, and she heard a knocking on the door. Figuring it was her husband, she knocked back in return. Moments later, another knock, and she returned it, and again, until the door opened, and her husband asked why she was knocking on the door. Her answer was, "Because you were knocking." He informed her that he had been downstairs watching television. A year or so after I shared our experiences, my mother and brother, and me, of course, moved out of the house and into an apartment across the street from the neighborhood. My mother and her husband were separated, but he continuously stayed at our apartment anyway. One night, my mother decided to drive back to the house to feed our dog that we left behind at the house, while my stepfather was inside our apartment sleeping. I remained behind as well, sitting outside on the back patio. My mother was gone for 10 or 15 minutes before rushing back through the front door. The hairs on her arm were standing on edge, and she couldn't seem to collect her thoughts. She finally asked, "Do you think I'm crazy?" I laughed and asked why. She explained. While the dog was eating out in the garage, she had gone inside to close the blinds in the formal living room. While her back was the rest of the room, she heard a distant voice saying, "Get out of the house." She said she shook it off and walked up to the sunroom to close more blinds, where she again heard, "Get out of the house." Finally, while closing the blinds in the kitchen, she said that the voice was so close that she ran out of the house without closing the remaining blinds, jerked the dog into the garage, and sped back to the apartment. A year later, we moved to Georgia, where there have been no experiences in any of the houses we've resided in. I've been debating with myself as to why she and I would see people standing on the same staircase, and if their different clothing represented anything. Maybe because that's where most of my parents' fights would take place, or what was trying to get our attention by knocking on the walls. What I do know is that now that my mother is no longer married to the same man, we haven't experienced anything of the like since. I've always been interested in the supernatural, and am convinced that ghosts do exist. Unfortunately, I've never seen nor felt one. I am, however, overly curious and try on occasion to find one. I have a friend that often accompanies me, but sometimes she gets too afraid to press on. She can feel their presence and bows out. I think she can feel them. And if she perceives them as evil, well, she just quits. She has a gift that I can only wish I had. I, on the other hand, don't possess that gift, and as a result, am fearless. I suppose I ought to get on with my stories. Again, I've never seen a ghost, but listen to this. My curiosity in the supernatural goes years back. When I was younger, I attended a university in southern Illinois. I had a friend named Tanya, whose parents lived in a supposedly haunted house. They claimed that a ghost lived in the attic of their home. I don't remember the spirit's name at this time, but I do remember that they claimed that she liked to play with the hangers in the attic, and that they could hear her slamming doors and climbing to the stairs to the attic at night. There were other farther-fetched claims as well, but they said that whenever something strange happened, they would always have the association of the smell of lilacs. It was, apparently, the popular perfume of the time when this girl passed. No explanation was given as to the events of her passing. Anyway, I was invited to sleep in the attic of their home one night. I was apprehensive at first to be able to relax enough to sleep, but in time, I started to drift away. Just as sleep began to overtake me, I heard a very loud and unsettling rustling in front of my face. I instantaneously turned on a light right next to me. Nothing was there. The memory of that sound made it very difficult for me to concentrate on sleeping again. But after what seemed to be about 2 hours, I started to succumb to sleep again. As I drifted again came that sound, louder this time. I stayed calm for a few minutes to be sure this was actually happening. I stayed still, but pulled my eyes open to see if anything was there. There was no light. My eyes were wide open. I was fully awake, and the noise persisted. Again, I turned on the light, and there was nothing there. Once the light came on, the noise ceased instantly. This time, I decided to feign asleep. I turned out the light, closed my eyes, and regulated my breathing. I did everything like sleeping, without actually sleeping. Eventually, I even got my heart to stop pounding. Hell, I was scared, but managed to seem oblivious. Once again, it started, and in an instant, I turned on the light yet again. There, in front of my eyes, was a mass, a ball of white moths, about the size of a softball. As soon as the light hit them, they flew straight into the shadows of the room. Not like moths fly, they flew straight course into the various shadows and disappeared. They disappeared into shadows, not holes or cracks. They weren't real. No moth could do what I'm trying to describe here. Once they disappeared, my fear was gone, and has been ever since. I'm no longer afraid of ghosts. I believe that if a spirit chooses to stick around, it is because it, or they, have something to tell you. I'm convinced that these moths were presented to me by Lily at Girl, and I believe that she showed them to me only because she wanted to be acknowledged, not feared. I think that if I were to return to this house, she'd show me the moths again. This time, I'd be much more appreciative and a lot less afraid. I'd see it as a welcome to an old friend than as a threat to a newcomer. I think she just needs someone to talk to. She must have been terribly lonely. Moth story number 2. About a year after that incident, I was still in college. I was on the 16th story of my dorm, cramming for finals. I happened to look out onto the ledge, outside the window, where sat a beautiful green wood moth. I knew it meant something, but at the time, not what. My roommate walked into the study area and informed me that I had a call from my mother. I went into my room and answered the phone by saying, "Is Gran dead?" My mom was speechless for a time. Then she said, "How did you know?" I didn't answer. You see, my Gran was 103 when she died. For years, she didn't know my name. She always just called me Janine's son. Well, on the day that her husband died at 98 years old, I took her for a long walk around her house. She hadn't been out in years. During that brief walk, I had found a feather in a greenwood moth's wing. I saved them as a token of that day. After that walk, she never called me Janine's son anymore. She called me that nice boy who took me for a walk about twice. Then, she just called me that nice boy. When I heard of her passing that day, I made arrangements to get to her funeral. I did, and upon viewing her casket, I placed the feather and the wing on her body. I feel that she's still around and still views me as the nice boy. Once again, I must reiterate that I've never seen a ghost. I promise you, though, that they are real, and I don't need to see to believe. Just ask Grandma Chip. She's still there. Look for a moth. When you do, he'll be a greenwood moth. This is what I like to call motion pictures on the wall. The first time it happened was when I was about 6 years old. I had woken up in the middle of the night and crept into bed with my parents. I still couldn't sleep, and when I rolled over towards the wall, it appeared that someone was showing a movie on it. Hard to explain, but it was a dim, full-color, silent motion picture, like a living painting, of a man dressed like Henry VIII, talking to a woman being helped into a wide hoop frame that went under her dress. That was it. Then it ended. Totally harmless, but still, how the heck did it get there? I told my mom about it in the morning. I had tried to wake her up and Dad, but they were sound asleep. She said I was just hallucinating because I was so tired, but was still amazed at my description of the hoop skirt and undergarment, as I've never seen one before. Okay, fast forward 3 more years. My brother and I were staying with our folks at our grandparents' house. We kids begged to sleep in the dining room under the huge table, so we could pretend it was a fort. Again, in the middle of the night, I awoke to find a huge silent motion picture on the wall. This time, I was able to wake my brother up, and together we watched it. He stood up and looked out the window to see if someone was doing it from the outside. No, nothing. No source of light or anything. In fact, the shadow of his head didn't even show on the wall. It completely disappeared for a second. But then, I heard a noise coming from the hallway in the house. A really frightening, disturbing wailing. It was the scariest sound that I have ever heard in my life, like someone being butchered to death. Then, into the dining room came a black shadow. We only saw the shadow for about 40 seconds before it ultimately dissipated. I swear to God, the shadow looked as if it was wearing a top hat, and it was running around before ultimately dissipating, like I said. I don't know how this happened, but even my friend saw this at the time, and we were in the dining room like I said, but there's nothing to explain this away. Maybe it was connected to the silent motion picture I saw on the wall. In fact, I can almost guarantee the motion picture on the wall was actually a family of ghosts. Actually, it was a family of ghosts that were shadow people. That's what I truly believe. Of course, I'm guessing that this family of shadow people must have been a part of a huge tragedy, because it's apparent that something caused the scream to happen. Whatever the case it was, it didn't matter now. It turned into something harmless and then became ruthlessly scary. I hope I never find out what exactly happened in the house. I'm not willing to face it. My second daughter was born on October 28th, 1986. She died of a sudden infant death syndrome 6 weeks later. She often lets us know she is still around by playing pranks and sometimes allows other family members to see her. When the movie Pocahontas came out, my oldest daughter loved it. We bought her a Pocahontas talking bank. If you haven't seen the type of bank I mean, it is one with Pocahontas and Grandmother Willow. If you drop a coin in it, Grandmother Willow starts talking. It has a button you can push for the same result. For about 3 months, this bank would start talking when no one was in the room with it. We kept the bank on a shelf in the bathroom above the sink. One morning, I was standing in front of the mirror shaving. The bank was 2 feet in front of me. But when the bank started talking, well, I don't often cut myself shaving, but this time, another time my wife had washed her favorite shirt. It was loose-fitting and lightweight, perfect for working in her garden. She washed it, and I know I took it from the washer and put it in the dryer. When we took the load of clothes out of the dryer, the shirt was nowhere to be found. 3 months later, we found it in a small cabinet in our bedroom. We only use the cabinet for storing small things and rarely open it. I can't remember what I was looking for, but I opened the cabinet and there was the shirt, neatly folded. There was another time when my wife bought me some material to make me a couple of shirts. She brought it home and folded it and put it away in her sewing trunk to work on later. A week later, she opened her sewing trunk to begin the work, and the material was gone. 6 months later, we had forgotten about the material, and my wife was going to sew another project. She opened her trunk, and there was the material, replaced once again by my second daughter. My youngest daughter, now 11 years old, often sees her sister either in the house or out in the yard. She sometimes talks to her, and I mean she carries on a conversation. My oldest daughter has also seen her. I've seen her once. She was standing by the living room in the entrance of the hallway. I was coming out of the kitchen and saw her in my peripheral vision. When I looked up, she vanished. I can say that those on the other side do not stay children forever. My second daughter, who we lost when she was a baby, now appears to us as a lovely 16-year-old. Then again, perhaps a spirit can appear in any form. Perhaps my daughter appears the age she would, so we can recognize her. It may seem strange to some people that we live with a spirit as a normal part of the family, but that's exactly what she is, and we love her the same as our two children who are here in the flesh. Being of Cherokee and Iraqi descent, we do not fear spirits, but try to understand them. They are not here to harm, only to guide. My great-grandfather was a self-proclaimed ghost hunter. I've heard many stories growing up from my grandfather of his exploits in the field. Now, he wasn't the whole mystical crystals and holy water type. His theory on ghosts was one shared by many. They are here for something. Either a lost item from their past, or a deed left undone. The way he went about the hunt was fairly simple-minded. He would follow tales of haunted houses, graveyards, bridges, whatever, and research them as well as he could, and try to figure out what the ghost wanted, and give it to them. At the time in history when he was doing this, many people were offering rewards for someone to step in a haunted house for a night, so he would move in and spend however much time it took. Not all of the stories my grandfather told were successes, but one I remember vividly was, I will tell it to you now, and then I'll relate my own experience. Back in the 1800s, my great-grandfather was a ghost hunter. He mainly did it for the reward money offered to sleep in haunted houses at first, but a growing need to help soon took over. One such place was a farmhouse on the Oklahoma prairie, where a woman in white, I know, stereotypical ghost story, would be seen walking down the staircase and out onto the front porch. It was one of those old wraparound types that goes all the way around the house. Once on the front porch, she would pace the length of the front of the house a few times and then disappear. Other times the woman would be crying, but you could never pin down the sound. My great-grandfather moved into this house and lived there for about 2 months while trying to figure out what the ghost wanted. Many times he would be sleeping in the entryway of the house, at the foot of the stairs, trying to catch a glimpse of the lady. After about 3 weeks of research, by talking to all the people that lived nearby, we are talking about 1800s Oklahoma nearby, and I guess that would be within a 10-mile radius. He found an older couple who had known the original builders of the house, and every family that lived there since. They began relating the story of the house to him, as best they could. It seems that the first lady to live in the house had only 2 children, a boy and a girl, and when the girl was about 16, she fell in love with one of the local farmer's sons. After a few months, the marriage was arranged, and events were set into motion. They got married in the spring in the front room of the house. They built their own small house on some of the land and lived there for a few years, until the girl's mother got ill. Then they moved in to stay and take care of her and the family. The brother had recently joined the army and was away. After a few months, the mother passed away, and the girl and her husband also became ill. The father was left to take care of them and soon became ill as well. They all died after about a year of fighting the illness and trying to keep the house and land cared for. After that, the boy, now serving in the army, came back to collect any belongings and dispense with the house. He sold the house to the local bank and left to live in Texas. About a year later, a young couple moved into the house and lived quite happily for about 3 years, until they started seeing the lady walking down the stairs and along the porch. They soon moved away and let the loan default back to the bank. A few other families had lived in the house, but all moved out soon after, and the bank was stuck with this house. Finally, the owner of the bank decided to offer a reward for anyone to sleep in the house to prove it wasn't haunted. Well, empowered with this knowledge, my great-grandfather went back to the house and set watch for the ghost. After seeing her a few times, he noticed she seemed to be looking for something on the porch, so he got some digging equipment and began to dig under the porch. After about 2 weeks of digging, he found a small gold ring. Thinking that had to be what the ghost wanted, he placed it on the railing of the porch and waited that night to see what happened. Nothing happened for about another week. Then he was sitting on the porch, enjoying the good weather, when he caught sight of her walking down the stairs. Not daring to move, he watched as she walked the length of the porch until she came even with the ring. She turned and seemed to look at the ring for a long time, then just vanished. He spent another week in the house and never heard so much as a creak and never saw the woman again. A ring he put under the first step of the stairway, and as far as anyone knows, is still there. That is how my grandfather related that story to me, not in the scary ghost story boogity-boo way, just a plain and simple fact, a piece of family history. Now my story. I was about 18 and living with a friend of mine and his mother. We all lived in a small house. Some would call it a shotgun shack because you could shoot a shotgun through the front door and not hit anything but the back door. It was all one room, only separated by a small wall that ran about 3 feet from each outer wall. You could walk straight from the living room to the kitchen, going through the bedroom in a straight line. One night, I was sleeping on the floor in the living room when I was awakened in the middle of the night. I don't know if it was a sound that woke me or just a bad feeling, but when I woke up, I happened to be turned so that I looked straight into the bedroom. I saw what looked like sheer curtains lit by moonlight blowing outside beside the bed that my friend's mother was sleeping in. I had an eerie feeling, but being half asleep, didn't think anything of it and promptly fell back asleep. When I woke up in the morning, I remember what had happened and looked at the wall, expecting to see an open window. The problem was, there is no window on that wall, not anywhere in the house. All the windows are on the opposite wall, so it couldn't have been a curtain. Later that day, I asked my friend's mom about it, and she told me that it was her father, that he came to help her when she had a bad night. She had terrible arthritis. She said that she never saw him, but could feel his presence. I had many other strange experiences in the house. Rocking chairs that didn't need anyone sitting in them to rock, things disappearing and reappearing in strange places when no one was home. To say the least, I was glad when I got an opportunity to move out. This incident occurred about 20 years ago in Mishikawa, Indiana, when I was only 9. Our house was built in 1904, so it had the huge solid oak doors in trim. The living room was very long, with ceilings which are 12 feet high. I hope you got the idea of the architecture of this house. The basement was a full one, divided into 2 rooms, and this is where most of the presents seemed to be. I'll get to that later. Back to the house though. The master bedroom was downstairs, with its entrance being oak sliding doors. All of the fixtures were of the early 1900s also, so the living lights were hanging chandeliers, one at each end of the living room. The upstairs had 3 bedrooms, with a landing at the top with a banister guarding the stairs. The stairs were enclosed and curved, and this will be important in a minute. The house upstairs wasn't insulated well, so in the winter it was cold, and in the summer, hot. As a consequence, my 2 brothers and I slept on the pull-out couch downstairs. One night, my younger brother and I went upstairs to get ready for bed, and as we were going down the stairs, I looked back up due to the feeling something was there, and I saw an apparition coming towards us. I screamed and told my brother to look up. He did, and saw the same. So we flew down the rest of the stairs and yelled at our parents to go look for the man. They did, and of course, nothing was there. Now, let me describe the ghost. He was not opaque, he was complete in his form, and he was dressed in Catholic priest clothes. I noticed this because we're not Catholic, but my friend next door was, and I visited her church just down the road. I thought this was very peculiar, but what I thought was even more peculiar was the fact he was holding a gun, and he pointed it directly at us, or so what I thought was a gun. Of course, my parents told us we were young and had very vivid imaginations, and it was nothing. Years later, however, my mother confessed that she knew the house was haunted, and also because when she was the only one home, she would hear something walking up the stairs and on the stairs. We always had German shepherds, and our dog would growl at the ceiling and would never go in the basement. Now, onto the basement. I knew there was a presence here in the back room where the water heater was, because it was much colder, and felt wrong. It felt evil and bad, and didn't want anyone there, because it felt you, and you just had to leave immediately. I want to say that the upstairs didn't have this feeling to it, even though this is where we saw the man. I'm not sure of the history of this house, and soon after this incident, we moved to Florida on my dad's company transfer. I just want to give my opinion on this. After researching different types of hauntings, I feel that this was a replay of some kind, and I was a witness to it. I do feel that there might have been more than one presence, because the evil in the basement was different than the other, and the one in the basement didn't want anyone there. He did other things to give us this feeling. Mostly, the noises were harmless and no bother to us, but it was the basement that we avoided for whatever reason. I would love to hear what you all think of this, and the type of haunting you feel it is. I used to spend a lot of nights driving around in my youth. I was young and reckless, and had no clear direction in life, so I'd often find myself aimlessly driving, late at night. I'd spent a majority of my adolescent years dependent on drugs, and unfortunately, almost succumbed to an overdose. I was harming others, but most importantly, I was on a path to self-destruction. The night before my overdose, I had a creepy paranormal experience that, fortunately for me and those around me, changed my entire life for the better. It was another one of those late night drives. I'd gotten into a verbal altercation with my parents. Words that weren't meant to be said were exchanged, and I ended up running away from home. I took the keys and headed out driving for hours until I ended up in an unfamiliar town. I was starting to get a little exhausted, was 6 hours away from home, and was running low on gas. What happened next will always be embedded into my subconscious for the rest of my life. I pulled up to a gas station in the middle of nowhere. Now, like I said, this area was completely isolated from the rest of the world. It had a last house on the left kind of feel. Until I ended up at the gas station. I'd driven past miles and miles of just cornfields and farmland. Woods all around, nobody in sight. I ended up walking to the gas station and bought myself a pack of cigarettes from the station attendant. He noticed I looked a little confused and asked if I was lost. I said yeah, I was. This was before GPS and cell phones, and I didn't have a map with me. He told me there was a bridge in the distance that was visible from the gas station less than a mile or so away, but said if I crossed it, I could pass another town nearby and find a highway that could take me back home. I thanked him, pumped my gas, and went driving towards the bridge. As I started to make my way through this road, and on my way through the bridge, rain started to pour down, and I could barely see through my windshield. It had rained so much that it almost obscured my vision, and there was no source of light anywhere along the dirt road I was traveling on, except for my headlights. The guy at the gas station told me the bridge was very close by, and even though I could see it in the distance before it started raining hard, it felt like it had been forever before I could see it. Just then, I finally came across the bridge, despite the downpour. This is the part that really startled me. I was driving across the bridge, absolutely nobody in sight, no other cars. It was late at night, 3 a.m., and nothing but trees and bushes scattered around the bridge. I kept driving across this long bridge, and that's when my headlights shined onto this small child who suddenly appeared within my field of vision. All I could remember was that his eyes were glowing, almost like an animal in the night. I was unable to stop in time, and I thought I had hit him. I immediately panicked, stopped the car in the pouring rain, got out to check to see if he was okay, and the kid was nowhere to be found. It confused the hell out of me, because again, what kid would be playing around in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, and in the pouring rain? I didn't even hear a thud, or any noise besides the sound of the rain falling down on my car. At the moment of impact, I looked under the car. It was as if this child didn't even exist. I remember distinctly that the boy was wearing overalls and a hat. It looked like a completely real boy. There was no mistaking that this was a human. Now, I mentioned my recklessness and drug abuse because this incident caused me to turn my life completely around. I was so worried that I accidentally hit a child, and it may have ran off into the woods, that it made me swear to always be alert and never fight with my parents again. This happened when my brother was around 5 years old. It was around 2 a.m., and he went into my parents' room to get in bed with my mom. My mom's bed was right by one of the bathroom doors. The door on the other end of the bathroom led to where the back door was, and the stairs to the basement. He got in bed and was facing the bathroom. He got scared and woke up my mom and asked who the little girl in the bathroom was. He said he had never seen her before. He told my mom that she was just standing there, staring at him. My mom said the way he was talking, like there was really someone there, it really scared her. She said she just rolled over and shut her eyes. She was too scared to even look. I don't think a 5-year-old imagines things like that. While we were in the same house, my mom's cousin was hunting in the mountains and accidentally fell on his gun and killed himself. The family thinks he came back to say bye because it was such a sudden death. A few days after he died, when we were all in bed, a light in the hallway bathroom would click on and off. It was an older house, so the switch made a really loud click when he turned it on and off. My mom would be sitting on the couch late at night, with her back facing the hallway. You can sometimes feel when someone is behind you, and she said she heard me breathing hard and walking up the hallway. She called my name and turned around, and no one was there. At the same time, at her cousin's parents' and sister's house, similar things were happening. His old toys from when he was younger were stored in the basement of his parents' house. One night his electric train turned on and was going around the track. No one knew this was happening to other family members until my mom called his parents and told them what was happening to her. The next day they went somewhere and tried to contact them. They all said they loved him and it was time for him to move on. They think he was trying to contact the family because he died suddenly. After they talked to him, everything stopped. The following happened back in July 1995. Me and a friend traveled around the UK by train. It was about 4 p.m. Then we checked in at a bed and breakfast in Manchester. All double room was occupied, so we got the 2 single rooms, which was located next to each other. We were quite tired after a long day trip by train, so we rest for a moment. Later we went out to eat something, had a beer in the hotel bar, and then headed up to the rooms for sleeping. The time was about 11 p.m. I closed the Vatican blind, turned off the light, and almost immediately fell asleep. The room was pitch dark. Then, after about 2 hours, I woke up and found the room bathed in light. The light almost blinded me. I had a strong emotion to walk towards the window, just like I was enforced to do so, and then I went up. I heard voices and music, like old folklore or something. The voices was only like a murmur, so I actually couldn't hear what it says. It was like being in a full-up restaurant or a pub or something. I was not actually scared, but it was an uneasy and confusing experience. Then, I reached the window and opened the Venetian blind. Everything turned to normal again, quiet and pitch dark. I went back to bed again, and to my surprise, I fell asleep after only about 10 minutes. The morning after, we met up and headed down the stairs for breakfast. Afraid of being regarded as a fool or jackass, I told him it was only a dream. Then, I almost dropped my coffee pot when he told me that the exact same thing happened to him. He has always been quite skeptical to the paranormal things, but I think this experience has changed his mind a bit. I would be very glad if you could give me your opinion. I have apprehension about what really happened that night. I know I was fully awakened, and it can't be my imagination, because the same thing happened to him. As I said in a previous mail, I'm not so good with English, so I hope you understand me. You may publish my story if you want, but you better circumscribe it before. Hi there, my name's Joe. My friend Colin probably wrote you recently about some recent activity. For the past I don't know how many years, I've been able to feel, and to an extent see ghosts. I can sense what they are feeling and what their intentions are. However, for about 3 years, my friend Colin started having sleeping problems. I already knew his house was haunted, but what was haunting it was the spirit of what I think is a 5-year-old child. For Christmas the year before, a friend of ours that lived in Thailand sent us all gifts. However, Colin was the one that received a house that you would leave tokens and gifts in to help ward off evil spirits. Over time, it stopped doing that. Trapped in the house was some kind of creature, like a demon. It was huge, dark, and very menacing. I still don't know how to use all of my abilities very well, but at the time, I sure as hell didn't, but I attempted this anyway. We attempted to destroy the house, and everything in it. It took 45 minutes just to get it to catch fire. During this 45 minutes, I was attempting to immobilize the creature inside the house. After 45 minutes, I was able to trap it, by pure luck. After I trapped it, I was able to see what was being stored in the house. It was a large field. Fire everywhere, dead bodies on fire, blood everywhere. It reminded me of what hell would look like when described to you as a child. After that, I was drained. I couldn't do much of anything. I thought I lost all my abilities, but after 2 months they started coming back, very slowly. I knew this only because I was able to see the ghost in Colin's house again. While I was living in Korea, I encountered a few spirits, but they were by chance and left over from the war. That was when I knew my abilities were back to full, but I wanted to learn how to better use them, and I'm not having any luck. Well, to end the story on a bad note, last week my friend Jess asked about any ghost encounter any of us have had, so Colin and I talked about this one. So Jess got curious and wanted to see where it happened. Reluctantly, we took him there. Surprisingly enough, development has been going on in the area for the last 5 years, but at the spot where we destroyed the house, nothing is built. We went to the spot, and I was able to feel it out from residue from when we first destroyed it, but after a few minutes, it wasn't just that. The feeling I was getting became stronger until it made me sick. I almost passed out, and I doubled over dry heaving. It turns out it was still trapped there until that night. Somehow, it got loose. I don't know how or why, but now I have to get rid of it for good, and I don't know how. In 1989, I moved into a government apartment in a small town containing 7 units. The last apartment was occupied by a single mom with a small child and her boyfriend. The previous year, they, man and woman, were murdered and shot to death in their bed, in their first bedroom by the woman's estranged ex. No one wanted to move into the apartment because of the history surrounding the apartment. I was a young mother and had 2 children and needed a place to live, and thought nothing of this. In time, I was told of the strange happenings of the place and chalked it up to superstition or small-minded people with too much time on their hands. Things were pretty quiet for me and my little ones for the first few months. Then small things started to occur. A light over the sink area in my kitchen would mysteriously come on in the middle of the night. Being the only adult in the house, and the only person who would actually reach the switch, this had me worried that I had an electrical short or something, and promptly had it checked out. Nothing. Perfectly normal. Kitchen cabinet doors would be halfway open in the mornings when I awoke. I scolded my oldest daughter, 7 years at the time, for climbing the counters and getting snacks out, and she told me that she was asleep and she didn't do it. My youngest daughter, 2 years old at the time, was starting to make a habit of getting up in the middle of the night and getting into bed with me. Very unusual for her. She's a hard sleeper. At one point, I was having trouble sleeping, so much so, to the point I went to a doctor and got sleeping medication, all to no avail. I always woke up at 3 a.m. and had a difficult time getting back to sleep. Nothing worked until I rearranged my bedroom furniture and moved my bed from one end of the room to the other. Once, while my oldest daughter was visiting her grandmother overnight, myself and my youngest daughter decided to take a bubble bath together in the late evening. While we were in the tub, I heard jingle bells rattling around in the cup on a shelf not 5 feet from me. All of my windows were closed, and no one else was in the house. Couldn't explain it at the time. After 3 years, I chose to move in with a man to a better neighborhood. My landlord chose that time to tell me the complete history of my apartment. He showed me the newspaper articles on what happened, and after reading all of them, I understood all. The ex climbed through the bathroom window and shot them both dead at 3 a.m. and took the child, which was sleeping between the two. Her bed was in the exact position as I had my bed when I couldn't sleep. The mom was a stay-at-home mom and was always in the kitchen fixing stuff for her little child, making homemade cookies, snacks, and such. She always left the kitchen sink light on for her boyfriend when he came in late at night. My daughter always getting into my bed late at night was quickly understood by me. The other bedroom was never used by the child. She always slept with her mother and the boyfriend. No other tenants have reported any activity in this unit. Of course, they didn't have a smaller female children either. Time will tell if this ghost will ever find peace or her final rest. Before moving out, the last night there, I made my peace with her and told her I understood why she did the things she did. I understand she wasn't trying to scare me or my little girls, and I wished her peace. One afternoon of 1995 or 96, I was dusting our bedroom, the master bedroom, in our apartment. Right beside our bedroom was a small hallway leading up to the bathroom into the other bedroom. I remember being in a very good mood. I'd been doing a few changes in the decoration of the bedroom and was now dusting. I was happy with the results, and as I was dusting, I was talking about the changes with my husband, or what I thought was my husband, standing in the hallway. All smiling and happy, I started to tell him, or what I thought was him, "Hey Frankie, look at what I've just done. Isn't that nice?" I advanced in the hallway to bring him in the bedroom, and as I neared him, he disappeared. I nearly jumped. Now, as I was dusting, I happened to turn my head towards the hallway, which was on my right, and there stood a man who very much looked like my husband and who was dressed in modern clothes, a short and a t-shirt. When I saw him, I was sure he was my husband. That is when I started talking to him, and as I was cheerily and happily explaining the changes to him, he had this most beautiful smile of encouragement. He seemed to be happy for me. What a surprise when I realized that I had been speaking to someone or something else than my husband, and when I saw it, it disappeared. It is when this being disappeared that I realized that my husband was lying on the couch and watching TV. He was very surprised when I told him what happened. I live in Australia, and I've been seeing spirits ever since I was about 2 years old. My first experience was just after my grandmother's death. I was visiting her grave for the first time, and then all of a sudden, I started hearing voices. They were telling me to leave, that it was too dangerous for them and me if I stayed, that I had to run and never turn around. It is weird that I remember it, although my memory is not as clear as my mother's, but I remember most of the details. I know that this is pretty hard to believe, but I give you my word it is true. Although I think about it now and realize that I wasn't scared, at the time I knew that I had to leave, so I told my mom and dad, and we left. My dad didn't believe me, but my mom did. Since then, I've had many experiences with spirits, all of which have been good, except for one. This happened when I was 15. I'd been roped into a swimming carnival, and I can't swim too good, so I was practicing in my pool. The pool is down the very back, and you can't see the house from the pool, as it is behind a shed. I've often seen spirits down the back, but it has never worried me. It was getting late, and I've been swimming for a while, so stopped for a break. Whilst I was standing in the middle of the pool, I seen a baby sitting on the fence that surrounds the pool. I tried to look away, but I was in a trance. I finally stopped looking at it, but it was good, as I was suddenly dragged under the water. I struggled for about 2 minutes before it would let go. When it finally did, I ran inside. I told my mom, and she never believed me, but I've never been down there on my own ever since. My name is Evan, and my friend's name is Scott. We're making a trip to North Carolina for a concert in August of 1996. After the concert, we drove for a long while, finally making it to South Carolina, and were in need of a place to camp, as it was getting pretty late. We found the Kings Mountain State Park entrance, but being almost 2 a.m., the gates was locked. We both got out of the VW camper to see if we could get the gate open. The road was completely deserted, and being at the entrance, we were not even close to any campsites. With the headlights of the camper as our only source of light, a woman appeared out of nowhere. She had dark hair, thin white dress, and was barefoot. She asked us if we were with the wedding party, and we replied that we were not. As quickly as she appeared, she was gone. Scott and I thought it was kind of weird. No evidence of another car on the road, and the fact that she was barefoot in the middle of nowhere at 2 a.m. in the morning. Entertaining the thought that we may have had an encounter with a ghost, we forgot about it. Recently, I was reminded of the incident and thought I'd surf the web to see if there was documentation of some similar experience when I found your site. I was blown away when I found an entry for Kings Mountain State Park and the woman in the white dress. The entry said that she was murdered by the Klan for marrying a black man. I wonder if they were married right before the murder, and that's why she asked us if we were the wedding party. In 1977, in the afternoon, when I was 11 years old, me and a couple friends were crayfishing at Happy Hollow Park in San Jose, California. We were fishing on the other side of the creek, away from the park. As we were walking through the heavy bush, we seen a lady with long black hair and wearing a red short dress and blouse, with a thick black belt, standing behind some bushes. She kind of looked like she was from the 60s. She was just standing there and staring at us. We were going to ask her about how she got across the creek, because she was dressed nicely and the crossing was about 10 to 20 feet, and there was no log or shallow part of the creek, and as we got closer, she just faded away. Then we just ran across the creek to the park. Me and my friends still remember this encounter. After this incident, I was interested in the paranormal and collected stories from my friends and family. I know this is kind of a short story, but I thought it was worth sharing. Thank you. I will try to make a short story, but wanted to share my story with your group. We purchased a home about 4.5 years ago. I met the lady and saw the husband only a short time when we had the inspection of the home. We were delayed on the closing because her husband passed away. Approximately 3 or 4 months after moving in, I kept seeing a man by our pool. Thinking it was the neighbor who lived behind us, I forgot about it. Our home sits on a couple of acres of land, and eventually, I started seeing this man near the woods and where they had a garden plot before. It appeared as though this man was hiding and smoking cigarettes of all things. I met and talked to one of the neighbors and told her of the strange behavior of the neighbor and asked if he ever did that on our property. I described the man to her and what he was doing, and her face went white. She told me I was describing the old owner of the house and that he died of lung cancer, but refused to stop smoking and did those things while living there so as his family wouldn't catch him. Eventually, he started appearing to me in the house, especially in the evening hours, sometimes slamming doors to unoccupied rooms or making hammering noises in the garage, which is under our house. It is just my husband and I who live in the house, and for almost 1.5 years, I was the only one to see him, but other people could hear the noises. Finally, my husband did see him, or what he thought to be the shadow of a man behind him, one day in our bedroom. As time went on, he became more and more active until I started to be afraid to be in the house by myself. He was beginning to be active, even during the daytime. I don't know if active is the right words to describe this, so I apologize if I am wrong. I finally was able to track down the previous owners and tell them what was going on. These people were wonderful and believed everything I was trying to tell them because of the things I was able to tell them about Dave that I couldn't have possibly known. They contacted us and agreed to come over to our house. They went through the whole house and talked to Dave as if he was there and telling him he had died. They told him we were the owners of the house now, and he no longer lived there and he had to leave. Now, I'm surely not a ghost expert, but I do know that after that night, I've never seen or heard from him again. Did this man cross over as I heard shows talk about? Luckily, I have wonderful friends, and they believe me, even though if I hadn't been there, I might have not. Thank you for listening to my story, even though you've probably heard stories like this quite often. Your website is great. I enjoyed visiting. When I was younger, I often despised sleeping in our basement, especially alone, so oftentimes, I would stay in my sister's room whenever my brother, who I shared a room with, was on a scouting adventure or something of that nature. But one night, I was out of luck when it came to the blessing of having someone to sleep with, when they were all either gone at a friend's house or attending girls' camp or a fishing trip. And of course, being 10 years of age, my mother, although loving and magnificent, believed I was a little too old to sleep with her. So I came up with a plan. I would invite my best friend over. Ever since Kristen and I were 4 years old, she has always hated that there were bars over our basement windows. Well, finally, it was off to bed. We scurried about brushing our teeth and giggling before Mom came to tuck us in. My brother and I shared a bunk bed, and I always liked to sleep up top. I felt safer with the concoct idea that any monsters would have to eat whoever's on the bottom bunk before they could get to me. Therefore, I could easily get away. Hope you followed it. Anyways, back to the story. So we were laying there and talking, and slowly drifted off to sleep, when I was suddenly awakened by a strange noise outside of the barred window. I glanced over to see what appeared to be a woman in white, staring with no expression at all at Kristen and I from outside the window. My heart began to race. I'd never seen her before. She has dark brown hair that seemed to be ratted, and a long-stained, torn and tattered dress. She looked so pale, and like I said, she was merely staring with no expression. I was officially freaked out. I thought I should calm down. It's my imagination running wildly, because I'm not with anybody or anyone. So I closed my eyes, praying that when I opened them again, she would be gone. So then I opened them, and she was still there. This time, she reached out her hands to me as though she wanted to hold me. I screamed, and then noticed she wasn't looking at me anymore, merely placing her focus on Kristen. Then I saw Kristen get up. She started walking towards the window. I called her name and said, "What are you thinking?" Kristen ignored me and continued walking. She crawled up on top of her toy box and began to unlatch the window. I screamed for her to stop. She seemed as though she was in a trance or daze and couldn't even hear me. I struggled between staying in bed and not moving, or getting up and latching the window and saving Kristen. My heart was racing. I felt nauseated. Then, all of a sudden, everything returned to normal. Then, all of a sudden, she woke up. She was awake from her trance. It turns out that she was sleepwalking. Curiously enough, I looked outside the window again, and the woman that I once saw had completely vanished. I was completely confused and dumbfounded. So I went over to Kristen to see if she was alright. At this point, Kristen was in my arms. She was shaking uncontrollably, and she regained consciousness. I asked her what she was thinking, why she ignored me, and she said all she could recall was an angelic voice singing to her, begging her to come with her. I said, "What?" She said she had some sort of dream or vision, and this is what happened. At that point, that's when I told Kristen that she got up and walked towards the window. I also let her know that there was a woman right outside the barred window, and she couldn't even believe it. Maybe this was the angelic person that she was talking about, the woman. Maybe she telepathically communicated, and as a result, ended up infiltrating her dreams, and then Kristen started sleepwalking. I know you might think I'm crazy, but this story did actually happen. I can vouch for two people being there, me, and of course her side of the story. Immediately when it happened, we were both so frozen that we didn't know what to do after that. I looked at Christy, and she was so delirious, but also very shocked at everything that happened. I asked her if she wanted to go to sleep again, and she replied, "But I can barely even move." So I said, "We can sleep here right on the floor." The next day, when we were at breakfast, we both just knew that this isn't a story many would believe, so we mostly just kept to ourselves. Until, of course, I actually wrote this story here today. Thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate you letting me tell this tale. And believe me, This is not something anyone would want to experience, but I guess we have a good story now. So impressed and comforted by your sight, I had an experience at the Sourdough Inn in Seward, Alaska 2 years ago that I've never shared with people anymore because they don't believe me, and felt inspired to write after reading on your site. The hotel was a brothel at the turn of the century, and the innkeeper will happily tell you that the upper rooms are haunted by the spirits of the girls who lived there. The most prevalent is the lady in white, who was the madam. I may be remembering the name wrong, but there are a few rooms downstairs in the basement as well, and that is where I had my encounter. My friend, Ollie, and I decided to stay there because of the legends, and had spent 2 nights upstairs without a peep. Our last night was in the basement. I had a little head cold and sniffles, and the innkeeper advised us to keep the windows closed due to a nasty draft. After securing the windows shut, we went to bed. About 2 hours into a fitful sleep, I was awakened by the window creaking open. I thought it was odd, since we had latched it. A window being to my left, I was staring at it when I realized there was a woman in white standing next to my bed. This is typically where people stop believing me. She noticed me notice her and reached out to feel my forehead. She was also holding what looked like a towel in her right hand and was smiling in the most comforting way. I couldn't help it though. I reached out and shook Ollie awake, looked back, and she was still there. Ollie fumbled to focus, and then I screamed like I've never screamed before in my life. I think she was just checking and making sure I was okay. And here's the interesting thing too. When we finally woke up and got our bearings, we realized the room was way too hot and even smelled a little funny. We had left our propane lantern on. I think that's why she opened the window. I feel better. It is a beautiful, magical place to stay. If I ever return, I've every intention. There was no malice in her visit. I only hope I cannot scream at her if I ever see her again. I just wanted to write and say that I had a scary experience at Banks, Ohio, House of Nightmares haunted house. Well, I was on the volunteer fire department for Centerburg, and we went there to work and to inspect the house. Well, one night, they had me working the spider, which I had to go up on the staircase by myself. The house once was an orphanage, mental hospital, and a Bible college. While I was working the spider, I had to look down to watch when the people were coming. Well, once, I just felt like someone was watching me, so I looked up and saw this little girl. She was see-through and was wearing a white tattered nightgown, had blonde hair, and was dragging a brown teddy bear. She was looking towards the ground, so I just started to freak out. So I shut my eyes and opened them again, and she was gone. Another experience I had at this house of nightmares. I was working the spider, and up on the staircase there was no door or anything, and I heard this man's voice ask if I was okay. Yes, up on the staircase, at the top, where there is no door, just completely alone and isolated from the rest of the people, and since there is no door, there is no way anyone could have gotten up there. Another time, when I was working on the spider, again, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It almost looked like a floating head coming straight towards me. Because I was looking at it in the corner of my eye, I couldn't get a clear look of what it looked like. But it could have been an orb as well. I'm not sure though, but I had a feeling that it was a head. Anyway, thanks for allowing me to share my story. I know it sounds kinda weird, but all of these events are true. I have felt, until rather recently, an unsettling presence in my apartment since my ex-husband moved out last November. It was almost as if the dwelling itself warned me away from crossing into particular rooms or areas of the apartment. There had been times when I could not sleep in my own bedroom because it was located near the rear of the apartment. I was afraid to go past the middle hallway. One night, I came up to get a jacket while my boyfriend was waiting outside for me in the car. I got as far as 1 foot in the doorway and felt the overwhelming presence, in some sense telling me to turn around and get out now. I forgot about the jacket and ran back downstairs and outside. I hadn't had one of those experiences in some time until my best friend came over to do an in-depth tarot card reading. She relies upon the power of her spirits and her Lord Phoenix. She's a Phoenix witch, which she explains to me as someone who has crossed over, was offered a second chance at life, or with the cost of helping less fortunate souls find their way back to heaven. My boyfriend was there at the time as well. When she was about finished with her reading, I happened to glance over by my computer in the dining room and saw a small, round, blurry ball floating past the computer and disappearing before it reached my living room where we were doing the reading. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I had to use the bathroom, which was located near the bedroom. As I went to get up and glance in that direction of the apartment, I had the overwhelming feeling to stay back away from there again. I asked her what was over there, and she went into the middle hallway with the candle. She came back with an angry expression, saying that the thing called her an abomination. She felt it referred to her being brought back and given a second chance at life. She felt the presence was jealous and hurt. She called me over to join her in the exorcism of the spirit. When she asked it repeatedly to leave, we both heard it in a strong, emphatic male voice say, "No." I was so scared. What scared me even more was that my boyfriend declared out of the blue, "Someone died in your bathroom." What? Yes, someone died in your shower. I knew about it since the first time I showered here. I decided it was not wise to sleep alone in my place that night, so as I went into my bedroom with both friends to pack, we noticed that things in my room had been disturbed and moved around. When we moved into my bathroom to get my toiletries, my boyfriend proceeded to tell me how the person died, slipped and fell in the shower, broken neck. I couldn't take it anymore and left that night. That was the last time I had my best friend to do any readings here without her spirit protection. This event is true and happened when I was 9 years old. It was the night of November 12th, my birthday. Me and my friends were walking back from the bowling alley to my house for a sleepover. The bowling alley was only 10 minutes away. Anyway, on the way back, my friend Matt dared me to go to the middle of the woods without my flashlight. I went in and came out 10 minutes later. All my friends had terrified looks on their faces. "What?" I asked. Matt pointed behind me. When I turned around, a 5-foot-tall woman in a white dress with black hair was standing there. She looked really mad. We ran as fast as we could. We finally got to the house and jumped in our sleeping bags. No one moved, and we eventually all fell asleep. I awoke at 3 a.m. in the morning to go get a glass of water. I had totally forgot about the incident until I stopped and heard very, very heavy breathing behind me. I thought it was my dog, but when I turned around, it was her. She had the same look on her face. I screamed as loud as I could, and my friends came running down the hall, asking me what happened. I told them, and we all went back in the room and stayed up until the next day. I told my mom what happened, but she didn't believe me. That is, until she found my pet snake dead, and she started seeing the strands of long black hair all over the house. We moved out shortly after that, and I will never go back to the house again, let alone look at it. I still find black hair in my bed sometimes, even though we're at our new house, and there's no one in my family with black hair. I think she is following me, maybe trying to tell me something. On rare occasions I'll be playing my drum set, when all of a sudden I stop and hear mumbling and groaning. If I ever have an encounter with this ghost again, I'll send it ASAP. Thank you.